You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. Japan, 1989. The tranquil image of a peaceful nation was shattered when a series of horrifying crimes came to light. Tsutomu Miyazaki, an unremarkable young man, would become synonymous with a level of depravity that sent shockwaves through the entire country. Over the span of several years, Miyazaki committed unspeakable acts that would haunt not only the victims and their families, but also an entire nation's sense of security. This is the story of Tsutomu Miyazaki, often referred to as the otaku killer or the vampire killer, whose life took a dark and disturbing path. But who was Tsutomu Miyazaki before he became a figure of terror, and what events led to the emergence of one of Japan's most notorious serial killers? In this series, we'll take a detailed look at his early life, the crimes that shocked the world, the trial that captivated the nation, and the lingering questions that still surround his actions. Chapter 1. Early Life and Background. Tsutomu Miyazaki was born on August 21st, 1962, in Tokyo, Japan, to a seemingly ordinary middle-class family. His father, a well-respected businessman, was known for his strict demeanor, while his mother was a more nurturing figure, but her overprotectiveness and obsession with cleanliness created an oppressive home environment. From the outside, the Miyazaki family appeared to live a life of stability, but Tsutomu's childhood would be marked by a growing sense of isolation and alienation. As a child, Tsutomu was not like other kids. He was shy and introverted, showing little interest in making friends or interacting with others. He had few social outlets, preferring to spend his time alone. It was during these early years that Tsutomu's fascination with the darker aspects of human nature began to take root. He developed an interest in horror films, particularly those with violent or macabre themes. His obsession with death, however, did not manifest in obvious ways at first. He was a quiet student, avoiding trouble, but there were hints that something was amiss. As he grew older, his interests became increasingly unsettling. He would often read books about bizarre and gruesome subjects, collecting information about real-life murders and famous serial killers. He developed an unhealthy obsession with death, which went unnoticed by his family and peers. While other children dreamed of growing up to be doctors, engineers, or artists, Miyazaki's dreams seemed more twisted, focused on fantasies involving death, mutilation, and violence. Chapter 2. The Early Crimes. In the late 1980s, Tsutomu Miyazaki's disturbing fantasies began to take a more dangerous form. Initially, his behavior was isolated. He would sometimes follow young girls on the street or engage in inappropriate interactions with strangers. But by 1988, his actions would escalate into the first of many horrifying crimes. Miyazaki's first known victim was a 4-year-old girl who was abducted in Tokyo. He took her to a secluded area where he subjected her to unspeakable acts of violence before ultimately killing her. The method of his crime was grotesque. Miyazaki's fascination with death and his desire to assert control over his victims seemed to drive him to these extreme actions. For him, it was more than just murder. It was about exerting complete dominance over his victims, engaging in acts of torture that reflected his twisted desires. After this first crime, Miyazaki would not stop. Over the course of the next several months, he abducted more young girls, each time becoming more brazen in his approach. He stalked his victims, sometimes taking photographs of them before their deaths. The photos were not just trophies to him, they were evidence of his power over life and death. In his mind, they were a means of immortalizing his actions, something that would live on long after his crimes had been committed. Chapter 3: The Crimes Unfold. By the time summer 1989 arrived, Miyazaki's crimes had escalated to their most heinous point. His confidence in his ability to evade capture grew as he continued his spree of abductions and murders. What made these crimes even more chilling was Miyazaki's methodical approach. He would often study his victims before making a move, learning their routines and choosing his moments carefully. In one particularly horrifying incident, Miyazaki abducted a young girl, took her to a remote location, and filmed the entire ordeal. This wasn't the first time he had filmed his crimes, but the footage was especially disturbing. He seemed to revel in the control he had over his victims, his acts of sadistic violence captured on tape for his own pleasure. At this point, the police had begun to recognize a pattern. Each of Miyazaki's victims was a young girl, and each crime followed a similar blueprint. Still, they struggled to connect the dots. Investigators were baffled by the lack of physical evidence, and they failed to see the connections between the disappearances at first. But they were about to receive a breakthrough one that would lead them directly to Miyazaki. Chapter 4: The Arrest and Confession. On August 22, 1989, after a tip from a local witness and a careful investigation, the police finally apprehended Tsutomu Miyazaki. The arrest was swift, but the true horror of what was to come lay in the details of his confession. During questioning, Miyazaki was eerily calm, almost detached from the gravity of his actions. He admitted to abducting and murdering several young girls, but what shocked investigators the most was his utter lack of remorse. Miyazaki's confession was chilling. He described the precise moments of his crimes, detailing how he would abduct the girls, bring them to isolated areas, and engage in acts of torture. He even admitted to taking photographs of his victims, capturing their suffering and fear for his personal satisfaction. As the confession unfolded, it became clear that Miyazaki's crimes were more depraved than anyone had initially imagined. But even more disturbing was his complete indifference to the suffering he had caused. It was as though he viewed his victims as nothing more than objects, tools in his quest to fulfill his violent fantasies. This detachment from human suffering made his crimes all the more terrifying. Chapter 5: The Trial. The trial of Tsutomu Miyazaki began in 1990, and it quickly became a media sensation. His crimes had already shocked the nation, but now the public would be forced to confront the horrifying details in the courtroom. The prosecution painted Miyazaki as a calculating, methodical killer, someone who had planned his murders with chilling precision. They argued that his actions were not the result of a fleeting impulse, but rather the product of a deeply disturbed mind. Miyazaki's defense team, on the other hand, claimed that he was suffering from a severe personality disorder, one that made him incapable of understanding the gravity of his actions. They argued that Miyazaki was not entirely responsible for his crimes and sought a lesser sentence based on his mental health. But this argument was met with skepticism, as experts testified that he had a clear understanding of what he was doing and had taken steps to conceal his crimes. Ultimately, the court found Miyazaki guilty of 4 murders and sentenced him to death. The verdict was met with widespread approval from the public, but it also sparked a debate about the death penalty and whether it was a just punishment for someone like Miyazaki. Chapter 6: The Aftermath. After nearly 2 decades on death row, Tsutomu Miyazaki was executed by lethal injection on June 17, 2008. His execution was the final chapter in a case that had haunted Japan for almost 2 decades. For many, his death brought a sense of closure, but the scars left by his crimes would never heal. Miyazaki's case continues to be studied by criminal psychologists as experts attempt to understand the mind of a man who could commit such horrific acts. His case has become a central focus in discussions about mental illness, the criminal justice system, and the nature of evil. Some argue that his upbringing and isolation played a significant role in shaping his twisted desires, while others believe he was simply born with a capacity for evil. The lasting impact of his crimes is still felt in Japan today. Families of his victims continue to live with the trauma of their loss, and the case remains a dark chapter in the nation's history. Tsutomu Miyazaki's name will forever be associated with one of the most chilling cases of serial murder in modern history, and it serves as a grim reminder of how darkness can fester beneath the surface of even the most ordinary lives. Tsutomu Miyazaki's story is one of tragedy, horror, and unspeakable acts of violence. As we reflect on the lives lost and the families forever changed by his actions, we are left with unsettling questions about the nature of evil and the forces that shape it. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, may your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.